Well, today on Blue Sky, we're continuing our series profiling Saskatchewan's political parties that are running in the provincial election. So today in the first half of the show, we'll hear from candidates running for the Saskatchewan Progress Party, formerly known as the Liberal Party. And in our second half hour, we'll hear from the leader of the Progressive Conservatives. If you have questions for any of these folks, get them in now. You can call 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. In the summer of 2023, the Saskatchewan Liberal Party rebranded. They're now known as the Saskatchewan Progress Party. They have two candidates running in this election, neither of whom is the current interim leader, Tunis Peters. One of the candidates is Jahangir Valiani, who's running for Saskatoon Stonebridge, and he's with me here in our Saskatoon studio. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
It's nice to meet you. So I want to start off by asking you a pretty simple question. Mm-hmm. What drew you to the Saskatchewan Progress Party?
You know, it had to do with how do we see progress happening? And we do have an opposition party, but I did not feel that the approaches they were taking were going to lead to what I felt would be a better province.
Because you actually,
I used to be a member of
the NDP.
Yes.
So what was happening within that party that made you not stay with them?
Well, no, it was a matter of how do we. What is the progress that they plan on making? And so they, for example, the NDP released its platform, and one of the big issues was, they want to increase spending, which is, and support education, and all of that's great. But the way that they said that they'd pay for it is through cutting waste. And so, for example, they even mentioned that it's $58 million of waste reduction, but the current deficit for the Saskatchewan government is $354 million. So how do you increase your spending on important services like education, without looking at being more creative at how to deal with the revenue side and the spending side? So that was kind of where I was a little bit disappointed. It felt like I wasn't being treated with honestly, like something has to give. So
the Saskatchewan Progress Party, why were you drawn to it? Because it's got such an interesting backstory, especially in Saskatchewan here, right? And we'll get into all of that. But what drew you to that party?
Well, so it was kind of an affiliation from kind of a long time.
An affiliation with the Liberals?
With the Liberal Party. From
the federal Liberals.
Yeah, with the federal Liberals. And so when I saw Jeff Walters out there campaigning, I'm like, oh, there's an option. And as I kind of got to know people in the party and things like that, there was an understanding that we need to have better services, we need to invest in Saskatchewan, and we need to look at how to pay for all of those services so that way we're not running into deficits for our children to pay off. And I think that that's kind of been more candid discussion that I felt was something that needed to be talked about.
So do you still see the Saskatchewan Progress Party having its Liberal roots, or is this a different party?
I think that so it's definitely much more progressive if you compare it. And I understand why the name changed, because there was just kind of a lot of differences in how things went. And I thought that was fair. But it was definitely, I thought that we were being a little bit more pragmatic with saying, look, you do need to invest in education. You do need to make sure that healthcare is looked after. We do need to make sure that the services exist to make life affordable for Saskatchewaners. But we have to be honest about how that needs to be paid for.
So so maybe give me an example. How would you pay for some of the services that you're offering or that you're promising through the Saskatchewan Progress Party?
Sure. So one of the issues is of course, royalty rates on Saskatchewan natural resources have been some of the lowest. So we would be looking at potash royalties, oil royalties to actually fund some of that increase in spending.
What else?
There is going to be also, if you're an ultra-high income earner, we would be looking at the taxation rates at that level, above $300,000. And I don't think that there's very many people above $300,000, but it starts to be like, look, we kind of all need to be in this boat. We need to row it together. The platforms were released from the major parties this weekend, and there was talk of affordability through tax cuts. And that, and given my experience and background, just seemed a complete oxymoron, because you cannot improve affordability for most people through cutting taxes. Cutting taxes results in cutting services, and it's happened in this province over the last number of years through having to pay for lunch school fees, having the cancelling of the Saskatchewan Transport Company, and that is a result of cutting taxes. It makes life more expensive from your pocketbook. Now, if you have a ton of money, then it doesn't matter, right? You can afford to be like, whatever, it's $100, or I have my own car. I don't need to worry about spending $200 on a taxi to go visit a relative in the hospital. But if we look at government as us as a community working together, then the question is how do we make it so that way each member of our community has the ability to grow? And taxes are the price we pay on that.
Before we go into more of the promises that the party is making, I want to know just a little bit more about you. So clearly you've been interested in politics for a while. If you dabbled in the NDP here and have had connections or connections to the federal Liberal Party, tell me more about who you are.
My wife and I moved to Saskatoon during the pandemic, though I was here about 20 years earlier when I did my master's, at USask. I ended up working abroad. I became a lawyer. Don't hold that against me. And then my wife and I did our training in Ottawa, and she got a job in Saskatoon right away. My firm didn't have any options here, so we ended up kind of commuting. She was commuting, and then once we had kids, we realized we needed to consolidate our family and be in one spot. And Saskatoon is where we chose to make our home.
And this election was just calling your name?
This election was calling my name, and I think for me, it has a lot to do with what are the decisions that are being made? How are they going to be made that impact my children? And is there an option to have a say in that? So that way, I feel better decisions can be made.
Give me another example of something that would maybe impact your children or their future here in Saskatchewan that you really want to tackle.
So, one of the biggest ones for us is education. There have been on a per student basis, there have been, inflation-adjusted cuts to education. We are now one of the lowest funded education providers in the public education system. And that needs to be reversed. When Saskatchewan was used to be one of the highest funding per student. And what that does is it provides services for students. It helps our children to excel in their studies. And it doesn't help just some students. It can help all students then. That's the benefit of public education is we get to make sure that no child is privileged just because of their station they're born in life. Everybody gets an opportunity.
What else is on your mind as a candidate? There were a couple things that popped out at me. Safe consumption clinics in all cities. Tell me about that.
So that is, if you go down to the basics of how do you, and drug addiction is a scourge. But the question is how do you engage with a community of people who are addicted? How do you engage with someone who's addicted so that way they want to seek help? And, there's been a lot of talk of involuntary admissions, but what about building the trust? And safe consumption sites create the space so that way people don't feel like the medical profession is part of a system that's against them or that's only looking to lock them up. So if you look at it from a holistic point of view, then you can start creating spaces where you can start building trust. And it's like, maybe we can, are you interested in recovery? Let's start looking at that process. And I've had a friend who died of an overdose due to drugs that were laced with fentanyl. You wouldn't have known it looking at him. He was professional, working hard, but because of fentanyl, died. And so the question becomes is where's the opportunities for us to interact so that way we can say hello. There's an opportunity for recovery because in my experience, trying to get people to do what they don't want to do is not usually a good way to change behaviors.
I'm so sorry about your friend. Do you think your friend would have accessed services at a safe consumption?
I don't know that. I honestly, he was. It was part of the grind of the job that he had at the time, and so I don't know if he would have, but I would have liked to have been. I don't know if he would have been at the stage where he would have recognized that it was a problem.
Yeah. How much, though, does something like that motivate you as a politician?
Oh, God, I'm a politician. Okay, so
running to be a politician.
So I think to the extent that, like, all the influences in my life are kind of like, how do I oversee, how do I kind of work to make life better, right? And so, stories like that, stories of, that my kids are going through, stories that my parents are going through, and kind of seeing like where are the friction points that are kind of making life a little bit harder. Because I think that people feel like life is a little bit harder. And I think this is a philosophy, is that we can make life easier only if we work together. If we go for, rampant individualism, and not that individualism is entirely wrong, but if we go for an extreme version of that, then life will be really hard for a lot of people and okay for a couple.
Where would you place this party on the political spectrum? Like, how would you define yourself and this party ideologically?
So unfortunately, political spectrums only work in one dimension. So if you were to say socially, we would be very progressive. We believe that a strong public system is needed in order to support our communities. That doesn't give license to rampant spending or huge budget deficits. So if you're going to say, well, from a fiscal perspective, where do you sit? Well, we might be more center from that perspective. And I think, again, just a little bit of, it's wonderful. Hey, I like tax cuts. I don't want to pay more in taxes. But the question is what do we need in order to make our society run well?
And how much of a difference do you think you can make in this campaign? Because as I said at the start, there's only 2 candidates running in this election, so you're not going to form government. But yet you're still doing it.
So I think the thing is at first principles, the legislature is our representatives come together to meet. And so in theory, there's an opportunity for discussion. Now, we've made it easier through parties and stuff like that. So the question is will the parties be in a majority position where they can ignore the will of half the constituents of the province, where the government doesn't have to pay attention to them? And it doesn't seem like it'll be that way. And it's really up to each voter to decide, well, you know what, who's actually the representative who will try their hardest to meet my interest? And you can choose whomever. We have 7 parties running. You don't have to pick one of the 2 major ones. And honestly, like from our party's point of view, one of the things that we will advocate for as one of the biggest issues is electoral reform. To make it so that way, you can say, well, I don't necessarily like all the positions of this party, then it creates opportunity and options for you.
How do people react to you on the campaign trail? Because, again, I just want to point out that the Liberals are maybe not loved by everybody in Saskatchewan. And so
I think it's fair.
What do you hear on that front?
You know what? I think from the most part, people have been very polite and they've been understanding that, we are there's no actual affiliation between the federal Liberals and the provincial Liberal, the Saskatchewan Progress Party, and that's part of the reason of the name change. And the question is what do you see as a path for prosperity for Saskatchewan for the future?
We're going to talk to the other candidate in just a second, but I want to remind people that you're not the leader of the party. We've been talking to the leaders of the different parties, but your leader is currently not running.
Yes.
Again, can I just ask you why? So this is Tunis Peters.
Yes.
Why not?
Well, you know what? I think here's the thing is that participation in a political party is a huge endorsement of democratic behavior. So, voting is a prig. Please vote. It starts next week. But, parties are run by volunteers and people who get out there and put their name forward, including Tunis. And if you and have to come out and be forward, in candidates. And that's not easy to do. I mean, one of the biggest fears people have is public speaking. And I think it's okay to say, you know what, here's a person who will help guide the ship, but doesn't necessarily want to be in front of cameras all the time.
Right.
While maybe my training made me a little bit of a detention hog. So,
Okay, don't go anywhere. We're going to bring Kathleen Tremblay into the conversation, also with the Saskatchewan Progress Party, a candidate for Regina Northeast. She's been listening. Kathleen, welcome to Blue Sky.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So what drove you to want to become involved in politics?
I actually have been heavily interested in politics from before I could even vote. I have a degree in political science, so I do have a lot of the background information. But it's just one of those things where I'm at a point in my life where I have been not so happy with the direction that things are going, and you look at the 2 big parties in Saskatchewan, and neither really fit me what I think about what I think the direction that we should be going. So especially looking at like smaller parties was a benefit to me.
So what are the issues that you're seeing in your day-to-day life that you think you could improve on?
So things like I personally have two young children in daycare, and one will be going to kindergarten next year. Things like full-time kindergarten would be lovely in this province, and I don't understand why we're not doing that. And it ties in with a lot of the issues of education as a whole and not being funded enough and things like that. And just where, the STF is currently at an impasse, and now things aren't going to be moving with that either until after the election and things are reformed and built back up. It's, that's a mess to be in, honestly.
Yeah, they're moving through the process of binding arbitration. But what is one other issue that is important to you that you want to bring forward on this campaign?
For me, it's a general affordability of life. Like I'm currently a one income household. I am the full-time worker. My husband is actually in school. So I have the privilege of being able to afford that, but it's tight. Like it's not something that everyone can do. And if you're looking at something where you are hitting your 40s and you don't enjoy what you do, you're stuck with it, because if you leave it, you're not going to be able to pay rent, pay mortgage, pay your car, buy gas, buy food, etc. Like, it's just, we have created such a mess in affordability. We really need some more radical change coming there to help address the needs of all people from Saskatchewan, not just the well-off.
So what would be an example from the campaign promises that the Saskatchewan Progress Party is making that would make life more affordable for people in Saskatchewan?
So the Sask Progress Party would be of interest to adopt a livable minimum wage, and as well as a guaranteed livable basic income. So you would have that little push, and that would really help people on the lower end of the income spectrum, because you're not really making life harder for anybody who does not have a hard life, but you are going to make such an incredible difference to those who are suffering, and being able to not have to worry so much about paying rent or feeding their children. Having those types of policies would benefit a big slice of Saskatchewan here.
And what are you hearing from people in your constituency, your Regina Northeast? What are you hearing?
I'm a one lady show at the moment on my political campaign. I run it mostly in the evenings when I get home from work, because I'm still working full time. There's always a concern about like local small petty crime and education and stuff, and schools being overcrowded and underfunded are big drivers in our community.
Okay, well, Kathleen, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That's Kathleen Tremblay with the Saskatchewan Progress Party, a candidate for Regina Northeast. Here with me in studio is Jahangir Valiani, who's also with the Saskatchewan Progress Party, one of two. You two are the two candidates.
Yes.
So
I think we might have a third.
Okay. What kind of growth do you hope your party might see? I mean, I'm assuming that that's part of the goal.
That is definitely like our number one goal, is that as people hear that there are options out there, that you don't just have to go with one of the two big parties, that you find something that meets with how you see, that matches with your values and what you want Saskatchewan to look like. And decide to volunteer. And like I said, this is probably one of the strongest ways you can engage with the democratic process, is to volunteer and say, you know what, it is important that we start representing these values in our decision-making bodies. So we volunteer, like door knocking, and we start getting people who are less shy to become candidates. We have, people with strong principles who help guide the ship and things like that.
What have you learned in the last 2 weeks about politics?
Oh, it's a lot of. It's. I mean, you know what? I think I've learned that there are a lot of people out there who really just want to hear good ideas about what can happen and are open-minded and receptive to it. I think we're fortunate to live in a province that's fairly open-minded and generous. Even if they decide to go a different way, they'll listen. What
would you do with the carbon tax? So that's my final question for you before we let you go.
Yeah, so I noticed that we would probably try to. We wouldn't fight the federal government on the carbon tax, but we would look to figure out how to make it work for Saskatchewaners, whether that's making something a built-in Saskatchewan solution.
Okay. If people are listening and you've got thoughts on what you've just heard, you could always try to squeeze in a question. We're taking them by email right now, bluesky@cbc.ca. Jahangir, so good to talk to you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.